Forget everything you think you know about Roman gladiators from the movies. The stoic heroes, the fights for honor, absolute garbage. The reality was 1,000 times dumber and infinitely more entertaining. We're talking about a world of out-of-shape, carb-loading barley eaters whose sweat was sold as a luxury perfume. This isn't a history lesson. It's a deep dive into the official blooper reel of the Roman Empire. Get ready for 44 of the most bizarre, nonsensical, and hilariously stupid facts about the arena's biggest stars. 1. That whole fight-to-the-death climax? Yeah, that was mostly for special occasions like a season finale. On a weekly basis? No way. The guys who owned Gladiators, the Lanistas, were basically cheapskate startup bros. Their fighters were their biggest investment. Their walking, grunting company assets. You don't take your brand new top-of-the-line MacBook and throw it in a swimming pool just to see if it floats. That's a catastrophic waste of money. A gladiator's job was to put on a good show, maybe get a dramatic but superficial boo-boo, and live to fake fight another day. It was ancient WWE, and a real career-ending injury was just bad for the bottom line, people. 2. So, about those rock-hard bodies, they were actually more like rock-hard bread loaves. Gladiators were called hordieri, or barley boys, because they were on a seafood diet of carbs. All the time. This wasn't for energy, it was a deliberate strategy to get fat. They were cultivating a cushy layer of battle blubber. This biological foam padding acted as a natural shield, protecting them from nicks and scrapes. It meant they could sustain a theatrical-looking wound for the cheering idiots in the crowd without, their guts spilling out. They basically invented the dirty bulk, proving that the ultimate warrior physique was, in fact, a dadbod. 3. This is where things go from dumb to certifiably insane. If a gladiator got really famous, his sweat became a designer fragrance. I'm not joking. They would scrape the sweat, dirt, and general man-filth off a fighter's body with a little metal tool, bottle it up, and sell it to rich Roman women as a high-end aphrodisiac. These ladies would then mix this eau de stank into their face cream. It's like if today, you could buy a vial of Post Malone's back sweat at Ulta Beauty. It is the most profoundly disgusting celebrity endorsement in all of human history, and I am losing my mind just thinking about it. 4. You'd think an arena fight would be pure chaos, but nope. The Romans, in their infinite weirdness, insisted on having referees. These guys, the Summa Rudis, stood in the arena like the world's most overzealous soccer moms, ready to blow the whistle. They would break up clinches, call penalties for illegal pokes, and probably tell the fighters to use their inside voices. You can just hear it. Gaius, that was an unsanctioned net throw. One more infraction like that and you're in timeout. I mean it. It's the kind of soul-crushing middle management that proves even in a supposed blood sport, there's always room for paperwork and procedural nonsense. 5. The famous thumbs-down gesture for doom? Utterly, completely, laughably wrong. That's a Hollywood invention. Most evidence suggests thumbs down actually meant swords down, as in, put your toys away, the show's over. The real gesture for a final curtain call was likely a thumb pointed up, like a drawn sword. So every single time you see a movie emperor giving that dramatic thumbs down, he's actually telling the crowd, nah, this guy's cool, let him live, he tried his best. It retroactively turns every serious gladiator movie into an accidental comedy. 6. Just when you thought the Roman Entertainment Committee had run out of bad ideas, one of them said, hold my fermented grape juice. Thus, the andabada was born. This was a special type of gladiator who fought wearing a helmet with 0 eye holes. He was completely blind. His entire strategy was to stumble around swinging a sword while listening for his equally blind opponent. It's a concept so moronic, it had to have been conceived on a dare. It's not a fight, it's a game of Marco Polo where everyone loses and the prize is just not getting accidentally stabbed by some other idiot in a bucket helmet. 7. Being a gladiator was the ultimate social whiplash. In public, you were a god. You were Justin Bieber, but with a trident. Kids had action figures of you. Your face was on lunchboxes. But on paper, you were less than nothing. You were legally classified as infames, which put you in the same social doghouse as actors and clowns, which really tells you what Romans thought of the performing arts. This meant you could be the most famous person in the world, but you had the credit score of a ghost. You couldn't vote. You couldn't testify in court. You probably couldn't even get a library card. It was the celebrity dream with none of the perks. 8. Before bodybuilders were choking down chalky protein shakes, gladiators had their own signature wellness drink. And it was objectively revolting. After a workout, they would pound a beverage made of water mixed with plant ash. Yes, the dusty remains of a campfire. It sounds like a punishment, but the ash was packed with calcium and minerals for bone health. You have to admire the commitment to sports nutrition, but my God, it was the ancient world's first and worst health fad. A gritty, smoky sludge that probably tasted like licking a wet brick. It's a miracle anyone had the stomach to drink it, let alone fight afterwards. 9. So, the Romans got bored of watching men fight. What was their solution? Did they invent a new sport? Of course not. They just threw women into the arena. Yes, there were female gladiators, the Gladiatrix. But it gets weirder. The Emperor Domitian, who was clearly running out of ideas, would stage novelty fights between these women and dwarves. I am not making that up. This wasn't a sport. It was a desperate cry for new content from a civilization that had seen it all. It's the ancient equivalent of a TV network greenlighting a show called Celebrity Dwarf Wrestling Housewives. It's so profoundly strange, you can't even be mad. You just have to be impressed by the sheer, unadulterated weirdness. 10. Owning gladiators was a business, and the owners, the Lanistas, ran it like a sleazy car rental agency. They would rent their prized fighters out to event organizers for the day. And here's the kicker. They had the ancient world's most brutal insurance policy. If the organizer returned the gladiator damaged, as in no longer breathing, they had to pay the Lanista the gladiator's full replacement value. You can just imagine the conversation at the returns desk. Yeah, so about Maximus, there's a bit of a scratch on him. A really big sword-shaped scratch. Here's your bag of gold, I guess. It was the ultimate you break it, you buy it policy. And it's why most fights were just for show. 11. Emperor Commodus, you know, the villain from that movie, was obsessed with being a gladiator. But he played the game on God mode. He'd step into the arena, dressed in fancy armor, to fight. But his opponents were given dull weapons and a very simple script. Make the emperor look cool, but for the love of Jupiter, do not actually touch him. It was the ancient equivalent of a billionaire renting out an entire basketball court to dunk on a bunch of 5-year-olds. He was getting the glory with zero risk, a trust fund kid playing make-believe while thousands of people had to pretend it was real. His opponents had the most stressful job in Rome: lose convincingly or face a very real consequence. 12. While some gladiators were decked out in heavy armor, there was one guy who was the laughingstock of the locker room, the retiarius. This dude showed up to a sword fight dressed for a day at the beach. His equipment? A fishing net and a trident. That's it. He was basically a half-naked fisherman trying to catch a dude in full-plate armor. Other gladiators mocked him for being unmanly because his whole strategy was based on being tricky and annoying instead of just hitting things really, really hard. He was the hipster of the arena, the guy who thought brute force was too mainstream, and for that, he was respected by absolutely no one. 13. As we've established, these guys were carb-loading freaks. But the reason is even dumber than just getting a layer of padding. It was all about the special effects. The Lanistas wanted a fighter with a bit of juice on him. That layer of fat meant that a shallow cut would look way more dramatic than it actually was. It produced a better visual for the cheap seats without damaging the product. It's like a movie director using extra corn syrup for fake blood. The entire business model was more sizzle, less steak. They wanted a spectacular show with lots of dramatic, gory-looking moments, but at the end of the day, they wanted their investment to be able to clock in for work on Monday. 14. Roman medicine was basically just a list of things you shouldn't do. For example, some people believed that the cure for epilepsy was to drink. Well, a gladiator's special recovery beverage. And by beverage, I mean the red stuff. Right from the source, freshly squeezed. This is the ancient equivalent of a Goop article suggesting you cure a headache by sniffing radioactive waste. It's not medicine, it's a public health crisis waiting to happen. The fact that people were so desperate and so poorly informed that this seemed like a viable medical treatment tells you everything you need to know about their healthcare system. Your doctor was just some guy who said, I don't know, try drinking that. 15. The origin story of the Gladiator games is probably the most awkward party planning idea in history. It all started with Etruscan funerals. To honor the dead, they decided that a eulogy was boring. What would really honor Grandpa's memory, they figured, was making two guys whack each other with weapons near his grave. It was a solemn ritual that somehow, over time, spiraled out of control and morphed into the Roman equivalent of the Super Bowl. It's like if we started celebrating Thanksgiving by having a demolition derby on the front lawn. It's a bizarre leap in logic that took something grim and turned it into a multi-billion sestertii entertainment franchise. 16. The night before the games, the gladiators were treated to a public dinner called the Cena Libera. But it wasn't a party. It was the world's creepiest pre-owned car inspection. The public was invited to come and gawk at the fighters while they ate. People would walk around poking their muscles, checking their teeth, and making bets on who would perform better the next day. The gladiators just had to sit there trying to enjoy their barley mush, while a bunch of weirdos treated them like livestock at a state fair. It was a human petting zoo, and it stands as the most uncomfortable dinner date in all of recorded history. Don't tap on the glass, you're scaring the retiarius. 17. When gladiators were training, they didn't use their actual combat weapons. That would be too logical. Instead, they used wooden practice swords called rudies. But here's the kicker. These wooden swords were deliberately made to be twice as heavy as the real steel ones. It's the most backward training philosophy imaginable. It's like a professional baseball player practicing with a bat made of lead, or a sprinter training by running through wet cement. The idea was that if you could handle this ridiculously oversized piece of lumber, the real sword would feel as light as a feather. It's a method so inefficient and nonsensical, it could only have been invented by a gym coach who got paid by the hour. 18. Gladiators might have been social outcasts, but they had better benefits than some modern gig workers. They formed their own unions, or social clubs called collegia. These weren't for negotiating better pay or vacation days. Their primary purpose was to act as a funeral fund. Members would pay dues to guarantee that if they met an unfortunate end in the arena, their buddies would chip in to give them a decent burial with a proper gravestone. It's a bit grim, but also kind of sweet. It's like a really morbid country club where the main perk is that your friends will make sure you get a nice goodbye party after a particularly bad day at the office. 19. Sometimes the gladiator games weren't a sport at all. They were just a very theatrical and inefficient form of public execution. These were the no-contest fights. On one side, you'd have a seasoned, heavily armed gladiator. On the other side, some poor, unarmed criminal who had been sentenced to death. It wasn't a fight. It was a foregone conclusion wrapped in a show. It's like putting a grizzly bear in a boxing ring with a terrified accountant. The crowd knew it, the gladiator knew it, and the accountant definitely knew it. It was the Roman state's way of getting rid of undesirables while also selling tickets and popcorn. Dark but brutally practical. 20. Gladiator armor looks cool in museums, but it was designed with some glaringly stupid weaknesses. It was intentionally incomplete. You'd have a guy with a giant metal shoulder pad and a fancy helmet, but his entire chest might be completely exposed. This wasn't a budget issue. It was a feature, not a bug. The armor was designed to protect non-vital areas while leaving other parts open for business. This ensured that the fights would produce more spectacular, crowd-pleasing, but not immediately career-ending, injuries. It's like designing a car with reinforced bumpers but no brakes. It's a recipe for disaster that prioritizes style over any form of common sense. 21. The biggest gladiators weren't just fighters, they were full-blown commercial brands. They had their own merchandise lines, and the ancient Roman equivalent of a gift shop was full of their stuff. We're talking oil lamps shaped like their helmets, little clay action figures for the kids, and even ceramic plates with their faces painted on them. You could literally eat your dinner off of your favorite gladiator's forehead. It proves that there's no concept so sacred that capitalism can't turn it into a cheap souvenir. It was the ancient world's version of a Funko Pop collection, and it's just as tacky. 22. Before a new recruit could join a gladiator school, he had to take a solemn oath, the Sacramentum Gladiatorium. And this oath was bonkers. The recruit had to swear that he was willing to be burned, to be bound, to be beaten, and to be slain by the sword. It's less of an employment contract and more of a waiver you'd sign before being shot out of a cannon. It's the ultimate I agree to the terms and conditions without reading the fine print. You're basically giving your boss legal permission to have a really, really bad day at your expense. 23. How did you find out about the next big gladiator match? You just had to look at the walls. Promoters would hire people to paint advertisements, or edicta, directly onto the sides of buildings all over the city. These were the ancient world's graffiti billboards, announcing the date, the venue, and the star pairings. You can just imagine some Roman citizen waking up to find a giant ad for Flamma versus Priscus painted on the side of his apartment building. There was no escaping the hype. It was a marketing strategy so aggressive and invasive, it makes modern pop-up ads look polite and reserved. 24. Not everyone in the arena was a slave forced to fight. A surprising number of gladiators were freemen who volunteered for the job. These guys were down on their luck, buried in debt, or just adrenaline junkies who were incredibly bored with their civilian lives. They would sign a contract for a set number of years, hoping to score a big payday or a bit of fame. It's the ancient Roman equivalent of a washed-up celebrity going on a reality TV show. It's a desperate last-ditch effort to get your life back on track by doing something profoundly stupid and dangerous in front of a live audience. 25. Despite the whole dangerous profession thing, gladiators had access to some of the best doctors in the Roman Empire. This wasn't because their bosses cared about their well-being. It was because they were expensive investments. A gladiator was like a prized sports car. You don't take it to a cheap mechanic when it gets a dent. They had specialized physicians who were masters of sports medicine, patching them up after every performance. It's a hilarious paradox. You have a job where getting stabbed is a daily occupational hazard, but you also get better healthcare than 99% of the population. It's like having a company doctor whose main job is to fix the damage caused by the company's other policies. 26. Public executions were often the opening act for the gladiator games, and the Romans decided to make them theatrical. They wouldn't just execute a criminal, they would turn it into a grotesque stage play. The condemned person would be dressed up as a character from mythology who dies a horrible death, and then they would reenact that myth, literally. So you might be dressed as Icarus and pushed off a high platform, or costumed as Hercules and set on fire. It was the world's most messed up dinner theater, where the actors were on a one-way contract. It's a level of creative cruelty that is both horrifying and, from a production standpoint, bafflingly elaborate. 27. If a gladiator managed to survive his contract and win his freedom, he didn't get a gold watch or a pension plan. He got a wooden sword, the same kind he used for training, called a rudis. This was the ultimate symbol of retirement. It was like getting a diploma that said, "Congratulations, you are no longer required to get hit with things for a living." It was his official pink slip, his get-out-of-jail-free card. You can just imagine the scene. After years of fighting, a guy's handed a piece of wood and told, "All right, you're free to go. Try not to get a real job. You're probably not qualified for anything else." 28. Just when you thought the gladiator classes couldn't get more specialized, along comes the Debunked. This guy looked at the traditional sword and shield combo and said, "Shields are for cowards. Give me another sword." He fought with 2 swords at once and absolutely no defensive equipment. He was a pure glass cannon, all offense, 0 defense. This was the guy in a video game who maxes out his attack stats and completely ignores his health bar. It was an incredibly flashy and ridiculously high-risk fighting style. He either won spectacularly or he lost even more spectacularly. There was no in-between for the Dimacharius. 29. Being left-handed in the Roman world was usually a disadvantage, but in the arena, it was a secret superpower. A left-handed gladiator, or sceva, was a nightmare to fight. Think about it. Every gladiator spent years training to fight right-handed opponents. Their muscle memory, their blocking, their footwork, it was all geared for a righty. Then this dude shows up, holding his sword in the wrong hand, and suddenly all their training goes out the window. The angles are all weird, the attacks come from unexpected places. It's like a baseball team preparing for a fastball pitcher and then suddenly facing a guy who throws underhand. It was a simple biological quirk that gave them a massive, often decisive advantage. 30. The area around the Colosseum was basically ancient Rome's version of a Las Vegas afterparty. And the gladiators were the main attraction. Wealthy Roman matrons, who were supposed to be the pinnacle of virtue, would secretly pay astronomical sums of money for a private audience with the hottest stars of the arena. It was the ultimate groupie culture. These guys, who were legally considered scum, were simultaneously the most desirable men in the city. They'd show up, probably still glistening with oil from their fight, and get paid a fortune for a night. It's the kind of hypocrisy that makes you realize that no matter the century, fame and a good physique will always trump social status. 31. A huge part of a gladiator's training wasn't just about how to fight, but how to lose gracefully. They were taught how to die well, without screaming, crying, or begging for mercy. This was a crucial part of the show. The audience expected a stoic, noble end from their heroes. It's a bizarre performance review where one of the key metrics is how professionally you handle your own demise. You can imagine the trainers. Okay, your footwork is sloppy, your sword swing is weak, and your dying gasp sounds a little needy. Let's work on that. We need more dignity, less gurgling. It was the ultimate commitment to the bit. 32. The movie Gladiator gave us a great dramatic ending for Emperor Commodus. The reality? Not so much. He wasn't taken down by a heroic gladiator in the middle of the Colosseum. He was actually strangled in his bathtub by his personal trainer and sparring partner, a wrestler named Narcissus. After a failed attempt to poison him at dinner, he just threw it up. His conspirators sent in his workout buddy to finish the job. It's such an unglamorous, pathetic end for a guy who saw himself as a god. He didn't die a warrior's death. He died like a mob boss getting whacked in a steam room. 33. You've seen the movies where the hero gladiator bravely fights a tiger, right? Well, that's another Hollywood lie. Your average gladiator rarely, if ever, fought wild animals. That was a completely different job description for a specialist called a bestiarius. A gladiator's whole training was about fighting other humans. Throwing him in with a lion he's never seen before would be like asking a plumber to fix your Wi-Fi. He just doesn't have the right skills. The bestiari were the guys who knew how to handle beasts, while the gladiators stuck to what they knew, fighting other dudes in ridiculous outfits. It was a classic case of corporate specialization. 34. In the world of gladiator fashion, there was one outfit that was the absolute tank, the crupularius. This guy was encased from head to toe in heavy, segmented steel armor. He was basically a walking tin can. He was so heavily protected that he was nearly impossible to injure. The downside? He could barely move. He lumbered around the arena like a broken refrigerator, slow and clumsy. Fighting a crupularius was less of a duel and more of a demolition project. You had to find a way to knock him over and then try to pry him open like a stubborn jar of pickles. He had all the defense, but the agility of a garden gnome. 35. No self-respecting celebrity would go by their given name. Just like modern rock stars, gladiators had awesome stage names to build their brand. You wouldn't see a poster for Bob the Gladiator. No, you'd see names like Flamma, which means the flame, or Prudence, which means the prudent one. a hilariously ironic name for a guy in this line of work. These names were meant to sound cool and intimidating, creating a persona the crowd could get behind. It was all about marketing. You can just imagine the Lannista's branding meeting. Okay, your name is Marcus, which is boring. From now on, you are Decimator. Yeah, that's got a ring to it. Go sell some t-shirts, Decimator. 36. Before the main event, the crowd needed a warm-up act. And sometimes, that warm-up act was a comedy show. Organizers would stage pegniarii, which were mock fights where the performers used dull, harmless wooden weapons. It was basically slapstick comedy with swords. These guys would whack each other with oversized, cartoonish weapons, probably making goofy sound effects and falling over dramatically. It was the ancient Roman equivalent of the Three Stooges, designed to get the crowd laughing and loosened up before the more serious performances began. It just proves that even 2,000 years ago, people loved a good dumb pratfall. 37. The guy who owned a gladiator school, the Lanista, could be fantastically wealthy. He could own a villa, have servants, and eat the finest foods. But in the eyes of Roman society, he had the social status of a pimp. He was seen as a traitor in human flesh, a man who profited from the suffering and degradation of others for entertainment. So while he might be rich, no respectable aristocrat would ever invite him to a dinner party. He was the guy who got rich off a dirty, shameful business, and everyone knew it. It's the ultimate money can't buy you class scenario. He was a millionaire outcast. 38. So what happens when a gladiator finally wins his freedom and gets that coveted wooden sword? Does he retire to a quiet farm? Nope. His skills, being really good at hitting people and not much else, weren't exactly in high demand in the civilian job market. So many of them ended up in one of two jobs. The best became trainers at the very schools they just escaped from. Or, in a twist of supreme irony, they'd get hired as bodyguards for the same wealthy aristocrats who used to watch them from the stands. They went from being the entertainment to being the security, protecting the very people who once gambled on their lives. 39. Not every fight was a grueling, drawn-out affair. Some matches were held under a special rule, ad primum sanguinem, which means to first blood. The moment one of the gladiators got a visible cut, the fight was over. The referee would call it, and that was that. This was often used when two highly skilled and popular gladiators were matched up. The organizer didn't want to risk either of his prize assets getting seriously hurt. It was the gladiator equivalent of a friendly exhibition match. It gave the crowd a taste of action and a winner to cheer for without actually damaging the merchandise. It was a win-win for everyone except the bloodthirsty fans. 40. As if fighting on foot wasn't complicated enough, some gladiators did it on wheels. The Essadari were chariot fighting gladiators. The Romans basically stole this idea from the tribes they fought in Britain, saw it, and said, "Yeah, we're having that." An Essadarius would ride into the arena on a chariot, throwing spears or fighting with a sword, trying to knock his opponent off their own chariot. It was like a demolition derby mixed with a jousting tournament. It added a whole new level of chaos and horsepower to the games, because what's more entertaining than a sword fight? A sword fight at 30 miles per hour. 41. Gladiator schools, or ludi, were essentially high-security prisons. They had barracks with barred windows, armed guards, and harsh discipline. But inside, they were their own little self-contained worlds of vice. These schools often had their own bars, their own gambling dens where fighters could bet on dice games, and probably their own unofficial brothels. A gladiator could be locked away from the world, but still managed to lose his entire fight purse on a bad roll of the dice before he even stepped into the arena. It was a strange bubble of confinement and corruption, a prison where you could still get a drink and make a terrible financial decision. 42. The most superstitious Roman fans wouldn't just cheer for their favorite gladiator, they'd try to harness his power through some truly disgusting folk magic. There was a thriving market for good luck charms made from the ground-up bones of dead champions. This gladiator dust was sold as a powerful amulet to ward off bad luck. Of course, the vast majority of this stuff was completely fake. Street vendors were probably just grabbing old animal bones from the butcher shop, grinding them into a powder, and selling them to gullible fans. But hey, if carrying a little baggie of what you think is a dead guy's shin bone makes you feel luckier, who are we to judge? 43. The Romans loved a good theme. One of the most classic matchups was the retiarius, the fisherman with the net, against the murmillo. The murmillo was a heavily armed gladiator whose helmet was shaped like the head of a fish, so you literally had a symbolic battle of man versus nature playing out in the arena, the fisherman trying to catch the fishman. It was a high-concept, allegorical performance piece that also happened to involve dudes trying to poke each other with sharp objects. It's a level of artistic symbolism that is deeply, deeply silly when you remember it's all just an elaborate excuse for a fight. 44. For most gladiators, freedom was the ultimate prize. But not for all of them. Some became so addicted to the roar of the crowd, the adrenaline, and the celebrity lifestyle that they couldn't give it up. The ultimate example was a Syrian gladiator named Flamma. He was so successful and so popular that he was awarded the Rudis, the wooden sword of freedom, 4 separate times. And every single time, he refused it. He chose to sign another contract and return to the arena. He was a true showman who lived for the performance, and he eventually died in the arena at the age of 30, proving that for some people, the spotlight is a drug more powerful than life itself. So, there you have it. The world of gladiators was less about heroic sacrifice and more about bizarre business practices, terrible medicine, and some truly idiotic fashion choices. It was a weird, messy, and hilarious chapter in history. Next time you watch a gladiator movie, just remember the reality was probably dumber. What's the most ridiculous job you can imagine someone doing for fame and money today? Drop your answer in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this dive into historical absurdity, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more.